Hey folks, it's Nate, and it's time I got back to the drawing board. We're going to do something a little bit different tonight. For the last couple of weeks, I've been working on a script for the anthology Megaton that Narwhal is putting together. And I have done the script, and it's pretty much ready to go into production. So I'm working on some layouts and a little bit of reference material for Narwhal, who's going to do the final art. And I decided to do a quick sketch up of how I picture the main character, Meg McGregor. And this is for Narwhal's reference. It's got some world building stuff in it, and it's got basically how I pictured the character as I was writing the story. He may choose to tweak the design to fit better with his art style. That's fine. But by and large, this is just to show what I was thinking of, and you know, give him a point of reference, much like the layouts are. He could change a lot of those. It's more to give an impression of what I'm going for through the story, as opposed to, you know, hard and fast guidelines. This is a collaborative process, and it's important that everyone be flexible, but it's also important to clearly communicate what you're trying to do. And since I have a little bit of an artistic knack, I figured I would just go ahead and do a quick sketch up of the main character so that Narwhal had a visual reference to work off of. So if you're not familiar with the basics of the Dragster's project, not final name, it's set in a post-apocalyptic world, and there are mecha drivers who haul cargoes from place to place. They make deliveries, and basically we've conceived of them as big rig drivers, except they drive mechs instead of trucks. And Meg is a novice. She's on her first run because her dad's in trouble, and so she has to take his rig out and do a run for him, and try and get him out of trouble at the same time. Now, it's a post-apocalyptic world, so that's an important thing to keep in mind in character design. Post-apocalyptic clothing, well, we don't really have any real-world reference to go with, but there is a pretty clear standard for a post-apocalyptic genre clothing. It tends to be fairly cobbled together, unless you're some sort of wealthy and elite person. It tends to be fairly ragged. And it tends to be utilitarian. Now, we know that beyond that, this story takes place in a desert, specifically the Huron Desert, which is part of the Great Deserts. Whatever happened in this cataclysm turned all 5 of the North American Great Lakes into deserts. While the Great Lakes are at a pretty high latitude, it's still likely to be hot there, just because of the nature of the sun and that kind of thing. So clothing is going to be, it's going to come in one of 2 things. It's going to be brief to allow heat out, and it's going to be it's going to, there's going to be a secondary layer that will probably be removable and can cover the whole body to keep the sun off. That's probably going to be very loose and flowing to allow the person who wears it to get air circulation so they can cool off. If you look at any people group who has lived in the desert, that's basically what their clothing boils down to. So on top of that, we have to think a little bit about, you know, her job. She's a mecha driver. She drives the Sisyphus, which is a cargo hauler mech. It's not combat oriented, so it's extremely unlikely that she will have body armor or anything of the like. She is just, you know, a working schlub, as it were. So just do a quick character layout here. let's start with probably the most important part of the story is the MB radio, or Magic Band, kind of an evolution of the CB radio. This is her primary method of communication in the mecha, and we use it a lot. Most of the dialogue is actually spoken through CB radio, or the MB radio, as it were. So when you're talking on a CB radio, they talk about wearing your ears, which is a set of headphones. It's not like in those old cop shows where they just had it plugged into the dashboard and the speaker was blaring at them all the time. Truckers tend to have a set of ears, which is their headphones that they can talk on the radio on, so it's easier to hear what's going on. Now, they don't wear these all the time, is my understanding, and my research here is not by any means exhaustive. I'm not an expert. I just did some Googling, basically. But yeah, the consensus seems to be that there's a set of headgear that goes with this. So this is a pretty important part of the character design. And it is true that there's typically a separate push-to-talk part, and then these would plug into a console on a CB radio. Of course, we're not going with a true CB radio. These might be wireless. They have mecha, so their technology is obviously more advanced than ours is. So we'll go with just a set of wireless headphones, and maybe a mouthpiece, but that would probably be built into the deck of the mech, or at least left on the dash. She probably is not going to take it with her as she leaves the mecha. Although if it is an independent piece of technology, she might. So there's things you can think about, like maybe she wants to be able to hear if someone's trying to reach her, even if she climbs out of the mech. Things to think about. But she's going to be wearing the ears for most of the story in the cockpit and out. So on top of that, she's probably just got a short tank top because, again, she's in the desert. It's hot. This is probably not the most form-fitting garment. So there's that. And, of course, it's a fairly major part of her story that she kind of has to look after this dragon hatchling that pops up as she's making her run. So we should probably add some kind of visual cue that she has maternal or nurturing instincts. Fortunately, there's a very simple way to do that. So there we go. Of course, Meg is fairly young, probably 18 to 20. So she may not have kids of her own to use as a reference. But yes, nurturing and caring for this dragon is a big part of how she accomplishes, how the story plays out and how she accomplishes some of her goals. So, loose tank top and post-apocalyptic clothing tends to be ill-fitting, so maybe her pants ride a bit low because they're rather large, and maybe she has to kind of hold them up. And like that. So we'll give her some suspenders. This is very much function over aesthetics in the post-apocalyptic mecha dead monster dragging business. It's a very, very specialized line of work, I am aware, but it's what she's working in, at least for the time being. And so she's not really going to go for good-looking clothes, although you can still look good in the clothes. She's got some large kind of baggy pants, and of course, it being the post-apocalypse, maybe they have some patches in them just because she hasn't been able to take care of them as well as you might like, or maybe it's more accurate to say this is what you have to do to take care of your clothes in this post-apocalyptic world where you make your living dragging the corpses of giant monsters from place to place so that people can salvage the parts and the meat. So a big part of Meg's character in this story is that she's learning to drive a mech, and she's kind of a slight girl, but she is strong enough and headstrong enough, stubborn enough, and smart enough to make the mech do what she wants and not buckle under pressure. So typically the way you show strength or resolution is you make the some part of the character design very blocky. And since she expresses her resolution through her mech and through her how she controls and maneuvers that, and since she does that primarily through her hands via the controls and the feet via pedals, we're gonna give her a rather large, blocky, kind of really clunky pair of gloves. Now these probably wouldn't be practical because gloves kind of get in the way when you're trying to work with controls. However, the point here is to have something that expresses her character. This is a girl who's not afraid to get her hands dirty. She's doing her dad's job to get him out of trouble. And so this pair of gloves is kind of a symbol of her willingness to put her hands to work, even though maybe that's not a very ladylike kind of thing to do. And they're blocky because that speaks to the strength and the resolve she has as she sets out on this run. So she doesn't have dainty little girl hands. Or maybe she does inside the gloves, but she's willing to set that aside and take on the heavy hard work of a dragster. So there's a big pair of heavy gloves, and maybe she's got a heavy pair of blocky combat boots with some big heavy tread, and the laces are kind of broken, and she can't quite pull the tongue on those boots up as high as they used to go. So there's another indication that she has where she connects with the world. She is stubborn and strong. The heavy gloves and the heavy boots. Very little concession to aesthetics in that, and so she has these kind of boots. Very, very workmanlike. No real heel other than what's built into the tread to give her a better grip. That'll let her maneuver around. You know what? She could have like the speaker part of her MB radio like right there on her suspenders. And that's the talkie part. I like that. Leave that there. Okay, so we have the basic costume out there. We have the headset, and of course the we got the gloves, clothes appropriate to the part she plays in the world. Oh, and she would probably have some kind of loose, flowy overcoat for when she has to get out of the mech. So just going on, your typical desert tribe, that's usually something that would cover the entire head with a fair amount of coverage, and then would kind of fall down, wrap around the body, and then probably be kind of loose and flowy. you know, or it could be a poncho. Ponchos are always popular. But I think well, if you're going to be out working for a while, which you might have to do if you have to leave your mech to load or unload cargo or make repairs, you're probably going to want something that covers the head, just so you know the back of your neck or your nose doesn't get a sunburn. So something to think about there. We got some heavy black or probably really brown boots. Work boots tend to lean more towards brown rather than black. Because the thing with black is, especially if you're going to be working in dust or dirt, it will really stand out. So brown boots will kind of blend with dirt or mud better, or dust, than a solid black boot. So that just leaves the question of the hair and the face. So she's young again, maybe a little naive. So we'll give her some big wide eyes. And this in particular is a place where Narwhal's interpretation may differ a bit. Another thing you can do is give her a slightly more round face. That's an indication of youth and innocence, and that is, at least in this story, a big part of Meg's character. She's never done this before. She has to make some hard decisions when faced with things like violence and being stranded, and weighing the pros and cons of how she's going to do various things. So we'll give her some big eyes. Big eyes always play best in a small nose, and that also makes her. It weakens her presence a bit. Physically, Meg is probably not a very intimidating person. She almost kind of drowns in her role, and that's a big part. It's her first time out. She hasn't quite grown into it. Physically, she could be pretty small too, maybe 5'1" and so yeah. So her facial features: big eyes, small nose, probably very reduced mouth, to give the impression that she doesn't have a huge personal presence. And that will contrast nicely to the presence of Sisyphus, who is a 25-foot tall, or, well, we never really settled on a real size, but quite a large mech. I would say probably 20 to 25 feet is what I was picturing. Something large enough that the cockpit is basically the head and the upper part of the chest. That's how I've been envisioning Meg's space in relation to the rest of the mech. So not a very, very physically imposing person. And she probably, now I want to say that she has utilitarian hair. However, her entire character design up to this point has been highly utilitarian. So maybe she has one indulgence, and she has a bit more of a girly hairstyle. So maybe she does something a little bit decorative with her hair. Maybe she has a hairband. No. Let's see. Let's say she just has the bangs like this. A little must. because she's taking the headset on and off constantly. Or maybe not so constantly, but at least for this picture, she's not wearing the headset. And then maybe she wears most of the rest of it pinned up on one side. That's kind of decorative. That would get in the way of the headset. So you do have to think about these things. But what could she do? Maybe she just has a simple braid. It's a little longer than is practical, but it's a big part of her. It's her adornment in an otherwise utilitarian world. Like most youpers, she's got brown hair, but she's out in the sun a lot, so time has kind of bleached it, and it's not as dark as you go down as it is up top. You may not believe that's the case, but as someone with two sisters with dark hair that is quite long, let me tell you, even if you don't spend a lot of time outside, it gets noticeably lighter as you make your way down to the end. So, that's the basic concept for Meg's character design. And on top of that, I don't know, I'm kind of thinking that maybe she should wear something to indicate that she is a mecha driver, a dragster, as we've kind of been calling them. And they refer to their cargo, which is typically dragon corpses, as scales. So maybe she's got a little badge or something, kind of like, the Teamsters Union. So maybe she's got, I usually get hats, but maybe they got some lizard scales that they put on a little pin and use that to indicate that to one another that, yeah, I drag scales, I keep the world fed and in supplies. And maybe they just sort of wear that somewhere on their person to tell the world what they do. Because, it's a tough job, but it keeps the world going around. Someone's got to do it. So there you go. First pass at a character design, and of course I will pass this on over to Narwhal, see what he thinks of it, see what kind of changes he wants to make, and we'll go from there. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed that. Leaving a like and a subscribe down below if you did, and I'll talk to you later.